The Wanderer hat will appear in Country Knitting of Maine News and Views sometime in 2021. In the pattern, written pattern, there are 4 sizes from child to large adult and 3 crown styles. We will do the child size together so you can learn how it works. I call this style of cable wanderlust cables because they can wander all over the fabric and appear to be very large, but in fact, each cable is composed of a series of quite small crosses, so they're very easy to do. The secret is that as long as the crosses occur very frequently, in this case every other row, the knit stitches of the cable show up beautifully against the knit stitch background of the main garment. I have an entire book on this kind of cables, as you see, and I will place a link to it in the program notes in case that interests you. Set the carriage so that it will hold a needle brought all the way forward going left and will knit it back going right. That's the Russell levers on the Singer Studio machine, switching from H to N on Brother machines. For the main yarn, use a very soft number 5 yarn on the low end of number 5 that gets 3.6 stitches, 6 rows per inch, and stocking it. You may just cast on and bind off in the main yarn if you wish. I'm going to show you the method using waste yarn to cast on so that we can graft the ends. After the waste yarn and before the main yarn, knit in a row of ravel cord, but do not use your best ravel cord. Just use a thin, strong yarn because we'll be snipping this. Also put a row of such yarn after the main knitting and before the final waste yarn. We'll use 21 stitches, so cast on in the waste yarn on 21 stitches, knit your row of ravel cord. Now change to main yarn. Place stitch number 11, the center stitch, all the way forward and hold, and knit 2 rows. The cable takes place on the 10 stitches to the right of that one. That would be 12 and onward. Number them mentally 1 through 10. 5 and 6 are the center 2 stitches. Cross them right over left. Place 11 and hold and knit 2 rows. Now cross 4 and 5. 5 goes on to needle 4 before stitch 4 goes on to needle 5. Also cross 6 and 7. 6 moves to needle 7 first, then 7 moves to 6. Select the center needle and knit 2 rows, and do this every 2 rows from now on. Now cross stitches 3 and 4. There's an easy way to know which stitch should be replaced first on its new needle. While the legs are moving apart, it's the one that began closest to the center. While the legs of the diamond are converging, it's the one that began farthest away from the center. So the 2 legs of the diamond will always be mirror images of one another. Now the legs start moving back together. So we cross the same pairs of stitches as last time, but this time to start the inward motion, the stitch that began on the outside moves towards the center and is replaced first. To keep the image of the diamond developing, we now again cross stitches 4 and 5 with each other and 6 and 7 with each other. But the stitch that began on the outer edge moves inward before the inner one gets replaced on its new needle. The cable ends as it began, with stitches 5 and 6 being crossed. I always cross stitch 6 first and replace it on needle 5, then place 5 on needle 6. Take note that there is a cross at the beginning and at the end of the 12-row repeat. That means that if you use multiple pattern repeats, 2 of such crosses occur in sequence before you start taking the diamond legs out and then in again. I'm now making a second pattern repeat. While I do it, so you can watch and get it cemented into your brain, I want to make a couple of other comments. 1, you just saw me forget to set the center stitch to tuck and correct it. Over the course of the project, you may forget one time, and that's how you can fix it when you knit across and realize, whoops. Another thing, You have seen me lift up the fabric to get a good look at it several times. That is because I'm trying to think and design and demonstrate all at once, and sometimes I lose track of where I am. By looking at the back of the fabric, you can actually see the pattern starting to trace. It's not intuitive, you won't notice right away what that means, but as you work with this kind of design, it becomes informational and your mind can quickly identify where you last moved stitches. Make 8 complete repeats of the cable pattern. That will be 96 rows for the child size hat, which will be 16 inches in circumference. When done, knit in a row of disposable ravel cord and scrap off. Turn the fabric so that the edge that has the cable on it is up towards the machine, but you're not looking at the cable, you're looking at the purl side, and hang that edge on 60 needles. Make certain that each needle goes through a unique opening in the fabric. 2 must not share one opening. That is not a problem because you knitted many more rows than you need needles. When the first edge is hung, lift the second edge and hang it on the same needles. Now knit 30 rows straight up to the top of the crown. You may need to manually knit the very first row after the doubled crown was hung on the needles. I'm leaving in the footage of me actually succeeding in knitting it, but as you can see, I had to brace myself. It was pretty stiff, and this is the sturdiest machine I own, or that most people own. Most machines would appreciate the help if you just go ahead and manually knit those stitches. If that's not something you've ever done before, I do have a special video just on that. With the 30 rows complete, snip the yarn, leaving a long enough tail to use for both gathering and seaming. Put it into a yarn needle and run that needle through the existing stitches. Lift the fabric off of the machine, pull that needle so as to tighten the drawstring at the top of the hat, secure it. I do knot the tops of my hats. I know that knitters aren't supposed to make knots, but people aren't supposed to have their hats fail in midwinter either, and a knot helps with that. After securing the gathering at the top of the crown, use the still in your hand yarn needle to stitch the edges of the hat together down to the top of the hat band or the brim. If you decided to cast on and bind off, just continue seaming so as to go right behind the cast on and bind off. It is neater to do the 2 layers of the band separately, but just go ahead and seam it. Since I decided I was going to graft it, and I want to show you that in a minute, I am going to take my seam only down to the top of the hat brim. As you start to graft, the 2 ends of the brim will kind of stick out and not want to align with each other because we have all this waste yarn in the way. But the first half of the band pulls together quite easily just from doing the normal down through one stitch, up through the next, back to the other half of what you're grafting, down and up. And you know exactly what I'm talking about if you already know how to Kitchener stitch. If you do not, I have 3 other videos on that. They are basically on sock toes, but in them I'm able to go into considerably more detail about the mechanism of the Kitchener stitch than I'm able to do here. Here, I just want you to see the ends of the band coming together. So I'll put links to those videos in these program notes. As you start the second half of the band, you really need to get some of the waste yarn out of the way so as to be able to continue Kitchener stitching. You do not, however, want to just pull your ravel cord and get it all out of the way, because that would leave you with live stitches flapping in the breeze, and no good ever comes of that. That's why I said to use disposable ravel cord, because what we'll do is snip it, remove the portion that we have already grafted together, the portion of the waste yarn that was attached to that, and then start snipping and freeing a stitch or 2 at a time so as to be able to continue the grafting. This is actually pretty easy, but it's messy. The visual field is easily confused, so it pays to go slowly there's only about a dozen stitches you have to do like this, so we can afford to take our time. One of the great things about this style of hat is that it's incredibly warm because of being doubled for about 2¼ inches right around the ears, back of the neck, and forehead. And that is a real plus. But the top of the crown is not as thick, and personally, I find that more comfortable. I'm sure it depends on the person and on where that person lives. Also, the brim doesn't really have to be tight around the head to stay on well because of its weight. When the grafting is complete, we'll just have 2 or 3, maybe 4 yarn tails to secure and weave in, and the hat will be all done.